Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into Forza's past with Forza Motorsport 2 once again, and this time a car which I talk about quite a lot. I've referenced it a number of times in other videos in this very series. One of the most exclusive Hennessey models to be featured on any racing game, not just Forza. The Venom GT is the obvious choice, and of course in later Forza games we have the Hennessey Venom GT. It's a great performance car, incredibly fast, one of the fastest cars in the world, but not necessarily all that beginner friendly. It can be very good when used correctly, but it's quite slippery, it's very powerful, extremely fast, but nonetheless. Now this car follows some of those similar traits. It is also very powerful, very exclusive and very fast, but it's actually a lot more beginner friendly than the Venom GT is. Now it is also running a lot less power because this car is the Hennessey Venom, which is based on the Viper 800 twin turbo. Now there are different versions of the Hennessey Viper. There's the 650R, the 800 twin turbo, all the way up to an 1100 horsepower version, which is one of the fastest cars they've ever built. I believe that one was capable of something like 255 miles per hour. This one though, not quite that quick. And unlike the 1100, this is based on, of course, a first generation Viper. Now, the first generation Viper is a great performance car, and the Viper in general is one of those performance cars, but especially the older ones, which is very easy to not necessarily overlook, but to take it for granted. It's a car which has been so good for so long that people don't really think about it as much, whereas something like a Corvette, it's more fresh in the mind because they constantly come out with those newer versions, updated versions, Z06s, ZR1s, Stingrays, mid-engine versions, which is of course what we're getting pretty soon with the Corvette. With the Viper on the other hand, there are special versions, you've got the ACRs and that kind of thing, but they're a little bit quieter about releasing them than Chevy is. Chevy makes a big deal about all the new Corvettes, whereas the Viper, it's gone through only really a couple of facelifts since the original to the end of its run, but all of them share one thing in common. Well, they actually share a lot of things in common, but the one in particular with reference to here is that they're really good. The Viper, in a similar way to the Corvette, does a great job of bucking this completely false trend of saying that American cars can't take corners. That has never been true. As far as road cars go, they got a bit mushy in the 70s with the front-wheel drive and the fuel crisis and all that kind of thing, but their performance cars have actually never had bad handling. There are certain cars which are challenging, but you could say that about any country. America actually has extremely competitive cars, and some of my favourite classics are American, stuff like the GT40 and the Cobra. Now this car is another deceptively good one, because on paper the Viper sounds like a pure hot rod, something which should only be good in a straight line. It's got a massive engine, it's basically just a couple of seats attached to an engine. Surely, sounds like a Hot Wheels car. 8 litre V10, 450 horsepower-ish in GTS form, at least for the first generation. This one takes it to the next level though. 800 horsepower, it's actually over 800, 833, 901 pound-feet of torque, and the weight is even pretty good. It weighs 1,565 kilos. And although that may sound like quite a bit compared to some of the other cars that we talk about, such as race cars for instance, that's a similar kind of weight to something like a Lamborghini LP640, for instance. So that's not bad at all. Now the horsepower per tonne is still in a similar region to something like a Veyron at 532, and the class on this car is S, not too surprisingly, 953. So you can actually do a fair amount to it before bumping it up into the much less usable U-Class 999, up there with stuff like the ME412 and the TVR Speed 12. Now this car can easily go to that level, and as far as I can remember, this is the fastest accelerating car, in particular for 0 to 60, on Forza 2. 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. As far as I'm aware, it was the only car in the game that could do that. And that's without all-wheel drive. So overall, this car is incredible in a straight line. That pretty much goes without saying, but for 241 grand, which is almost the highest in the game, on par with some others, such as LMP cars, what can it actually do around corners? Because of course, straight line performance is great, but if you can't take a corner, well, there's not much point. The car doesn't have much of a range of use if it can't do that. Well, I'm happy to say that in a very similar way actually to the Lingenfelter Corvette, the 427, this is also a very forgiving car for a car with so much power, and again, that Corvette and Viper trait of being very competitive around the track. Far, in fact, from being just straight-line machines, they are not at all. They are great through corners also, and I would actually say that, ironically, for a car with even more power and a lot more torque, this Viper is even easier to drive than the Corvette 427. That's impressive. It's very impressive. In fact, this might even be the easiest car in the game to drive with that kind of power. You can easily tune this car up to around 1,000 horsepower. If I remember correctly, I think it's beyond 1,000 horsepower actually, which isn't too surprising, given that the normal Viper can still put out huge power anyway. And so overall, I would say that this is a car which it doesn't necessarily need to come back, because we do still have other Vipers, and on newer Forza games they can be made to be even quicker. They are among the fastest cars in the game, especially with all-wheel drive. But the thing which always set this particular Viper apart was, in a similar way to the Lingenfelter Corvette, that this one is more bespoke, it's more unique, it's more exclusive. And of course, this was the first iteration of Hennessey in the world of Forza, so that has to count for something. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of the Venom GT, but this one is a car that I think pretty much anyone can rally around, because it's just a good car in pretty much every way. It can certainly be outmaneuvered around corners, for sure. It's not a track car at the end of the day, but at the same time, for a car that is much more easily just a straight-line machine, it does a remarkably good job of taking corners as well. So if you do go back and play Forza 2, then this is definitely a unicorn to check out. It's a car which I don't particularly think will return, as nice as that would be, because there's just not a big enough need for it to return. Because as I said, we do still have Vipers, and they're still very good. So overall, certainly a unicorn that's worth checking out. Pretty cool car. Probably my most used car when I used to play the game back in the day. And overall, that's it for this particular pick. So of course, I'll see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.